Babylon did not sleep. Even after sunset, when the Euphrates turned black and the city's walls swallowed the last red light of the sky, the temples remained awake. Torches burned along marble corridors. Incense drifted through the air, thick and sweet, masking something older and darker beneath it. From a distance, the great ziggurat rose like a mountain made by human hands, its upper terraces hidden in shadow, its purpose whispered rather than spoken aloud. This was not simply a place of worship. This was where belief became command, and command became destiny. History remembers Babylon for its gardens, its laws, its brilliance. But behind the gold-plated bricks and glazed tiles existed another system, quiet, structured, and terrifyingly normalized. A system that turned faith into obligation and women into offerings. It was said that within these sacred walls, devotion was not measured in prayer alone, but in flesh. Ancient writers described the temple as holy ground. Yet those who entered felt the weight of something closer to judgment. Inside the courtyard, women sat in long lines, their heads crowned with cords, their eyes fixed on the stone floor. They did not speak. They did not move. They waited. The silence itself was part of the ritual. Around them, strangers passed through narrow paths marked by ropes, watching, choosing, calculating. This was not chaos. This was order, ritualized, regulated, sanctified. To the Babylonians, the goddess of love and war, demanded this. Desire was divine. Sexuality was sacred. To refuse was to defy the heavens. A man needed only to cast a coin and speak the goddess's name. Once the silver touched a woman's lap, the law was sealed. What followed was not considered shameful, but holy. The act was framed as service, the body as altar, the transaction as prayer. What makes this system so disturbing is not only what happened, but how ordinary it became. This was not hidden in back alleys or whispered among criminals. It stood at the center of the city, endorsed by priests, recorded by scribes, justified by myth. The temple prospered. The goddess was praised. And the women, whether willing, resigned, or terrified, were absorbed into the machinery of belief. Some entered the temple knowing they would never leave. Others came only once, told it was a duty owed to birth itself. Wealth did not excuse you. Beauty did not protect you. Law did not save you. In Babylon, holiness did not mean purity. It meant obedience. Clay tablets, hymns, and foreign testimonies all point to the same unsettling truth. This was not a rumor, not a slander invented by outsiders. It was an institution, a system refined over centuries, hidden not by secrecy, but by reverence. The language of the divine wrapped around acts that, seen through modern eyes, feel brutally clear. And yet, this is only the surface. Because beyond the public courtyards and official rituals lay inner chambers, rooms not described in hymns, not celebrated in festivals, not shown to visitors. Places where girls were trained, renamed, and stripped of their former lives long before they understood what devotion would demand of them. Behind the incense and the gold, Babylon kept deeper secrets, and those secrets waited in the dark. At the heart of Babylon stood the temple that dominated both skyline and conscience, a structure so vast and luminous that travelers mistook it for a mountain raised by the gods themselves. Yet those who crossed its threshold soon learned that its greatest power was not height or splendor, but silence. The outer courts rang with chants and offerings, priests moved with rehearsed authority, and worshippers bowed beneath painted reliefs of lions and stars. But beyond these public spaces lay corridors where the light dimmed and the air thickened, where incense no longer symbolized devotion, but concealment, and where holiness took on a shape few dared to name aloud. Within these inner chambers, women lived lives severed from the city beyond the walls. their days governed by ritual schedules and priestly commands. Their identities slowly dissolved into titles and functions. They were dressed differently from other women of Babylon, marked by distinctive robes, heavy cosmetics, and jewelry that reflected torchlight like molten gold, not to honor their individuality, but to signify their role. Every gesture they learned, every fragrance they wore, every movement of their body was part of a sacred performance, designed to please the goddess and sustain the temple's authority. What outsiders saw as divine mystery was, from within, a rigid system that left no room for refusal. Not men arrived from every corner of the known world. Merchants weary from caravans, soldiers between campaigns, locals seeking favor or absolution, all guided along roped pathways that transformed desire into procedure. Choice belonged entirely to the visitor. The woman remained seated, bound by custom, law, and belief, waiting for a moment that would release her from the ritual or condemn her to remain. A coin would fall, words invoking the goddess would be spoken, and the act would be sealed, not as a private exchange, but as a public affirmation of the order. Babylon had built around sex and power. The temple did not merely tolerate this system. It thrived on it. Offerings of silver, grain, livestock, and luxury goods flowed steadily into its treasuries, recorded meticulously by scribes whose tablets survive to this day. These were not vague donations, but precise accounts, evidence that sacred sexuality was administered like an enterprise, regulated, taxed, and protected. Priests justified every detail through theology, insisting that fertility of land, prosperity of city, and favor of the goddess depended on obedience to these rites. To question the ritual was to question the divine balance itself. Yet beneath the polished explanations lurked a quiet cruelty. Time moved differently for the women inside. Some fulfilled the ritual quickly and returned to their former lives, carrying a silence they were never meant to break. Others waited endlessly, day after day, watching seasons change through narrow openings, their youth slowly consumed by a rule that cared nothing for their despair. Beauty, once currency, faded. And when it did, the system offered no mercy, only continuation. The temple of Ishtar projected power not through violence, but through inevitability. It convinced an entire civilization that what happened within its walls was necessary, righteous, even beautiful. And as Babylon's influence spread, so did the model, carried like a shadow into other lands and other gods. But the most unsettling truth had not yet been spoken, because deeper still, beyond even these chambers, there existed a hidden preparation, one that began not with choice, but with childhood, and ended with lives that never truly belonged to those who lived them not in Babylon. Law did not end at the palace gates or the city courts. It reached into the temple, into the body, and into the most private moments of a woman's life. What made the sacred system so powerful was not fear alone, but legitimacy. This was not an underground practice tolerated by authorities. It was written into the legal and religious fabric of the civilization, reinforced by myth, custom, and statute, until refusal itself became unthinkable. The ritual was not merely encouraged. It was enforced by belief. Ancient accounts describe a rule so absolute that it erased the concept of consent entirely. Once a woman took her place in the sacred enclosure, she was bound by law not to rise until the ritual was completed. She could not reject a man. She could not negotiate terms. The moment a silver coin was cast and the goddess's name spoken, the act became sacred property, no longer belonging to the woman at all. The coin, regardless of its value, was transformed into a divine offering, and with it, her body was claimed by ritual obligation. To refuse was not a personal decision. It was a religious crime. This law functioned with chilling efficiency. Tall women, wealthy women, women adorned with fine clothing, often fulfilled the ritual quickly. their waiting measured in hours or days. Others remained seated for months, even years, watched by priests, surrounded by movement, yet trapped in stillness. Time stripped them of youth and hope alike, but the law offered no exception, no release, no compassion. The ritual would be completed, or the woman would remain, invisible yet exposed, suspended between devotion and abandonment. The cruelty of the system lay in its certainty. Babylonian society did not debate whether the law was fair, because fairness was irrelevant. The goddess demanded obedience, and the city complied. Families raised daughters, knowing this obligation might await them. Mothers prepared them not with resistance, but with resignation. From childhood, girls were taught that sacrifice was virtue, silence was strength, and suffering was service. The ritual did not shock Babylonian conscience. It defined it. Priests stood as interpreters of divine will, guardians of tradition, and enforcers of compliance. Their authority was absolute within the temple, supported by generations of belief and the weight of ancient precedent. They spoke of fertility, balance, cosmic order, insisting that the goddess's favor depended on human submission. And so the law endured, protected not by chains or soldiers, but by the conviction that to disobey was to invite disaster upon oneself and the city. What is most unsettling is how thoroughly this system normalized the unbearable. The women were not dragged screaming into the ritual. They were guided, instructed, and praised for their obedience. The absence of visible violence became its own disguise. The law did not need force when belief had already done the work. Yet even within this rigid structure, cracks appeared. Some records hint at hesitation, at prolonged waiting, at women who remained seated far longer than expected. These silences in the tablets suggest not devotion, but resistance that dared not speak its name. And beyond the legal codes and religious justifications, a darker truth waited to be revealed, one that began not in the temple courtyard, but in the lives of girls offered long before they understood what the law would demand of them, long before a woman ever crossed the temple courtyard, long before incense burned and silver coins fell. The system had already claimed its future servants. In Babylon, dedication often began in childhood, decided not by the girl herself, but by families pressed by poverty, debt, or belief. To offer a daughter to the temple was framed as honor, a sacred gift to the goddess Ishtar. Yet behind this language lay desperation and calculation. A family without land or dowry could surrender a girl to the temple and relieve itself of a burden, while priests received another body shaped for ritual. The exchange was quiet, socially acceptable, and irreversible. The girls were taken inside the temple complex and raised apart from ordinary life. Their memories of family slowly replaced by discipline and doctrine. They were taught hymns, dances, the correct gestures of reverence, the proper way to dress, to speak, to move. They learned the use of oils and perfumes, the meaning of symbols carved into stone, and the stories that justified their fate. Above all, they were taught obedience, reinforced daily by the idea that their bodies no longer belonged to them, but to the goddess they served. Childhood ended not with a clear moment, but with gradual erasure. Training was meticulous, because the temple demanded perfection. Beauty was refined, not natural. Hair was shaved or hidden beneath elaborate wigs, faces painted to meet ritual standards, bodies adorned to signal holiness rather than individuality. The girls learned that pleasing men was not desire but duty, not choice but command. Priests spoke of balance and fertility, of cosmic harmony sustained through sacrifice, and the girls absorbed these lessons before they were old enough to question them. By the time they reached maturity, resistance felt not only forbidden, but meaningless. Unlike ordinary women of Babylon, these temple servants were cut off from the future entirely. Marriage was forbidden. Children were not permitted. Their lives followed a single unbroken path within the temple walls, where years blended together into service without end. Some rose to higher status, supervising rituals or assisting priestesses of noble blood, but elevation did not mean freedom. It simply meant deeper entanglement in the system. For every girl who gained recognition, countless others remained anonymous. Their names recorded only in accounts and inventories. The temple justified this lifelong devotion as privilege, insisting that these women were closer to the divine than any others in the city. Yet outside the walls, society treated them with uneasy contradiction. They were revered and avoided, honored and stigmatized, considered sacred yet unfit for ordinary life. This isolation ensured silence. A woman without family, without children, without a place beyond the temple, had no audience for her suffering, even if she dared to speak. And as time passed, another question emerged, one the records never answered. What happened when youth faded, when beauty dulled, when the body no longer satisfied ritual expectation? The tablets fall quiet. Names disappear. Lives end without explanation. Somewhere beyond the chants and ceremonies lay a final abandonment, a fate as hidden as the chambers where these girls had been shaped. And it was there, in that silence, that the true cost of Babylon's sacred system waited to be revealed, by the height of Babylon's power. The temples were no longer merely spiritual centers. They were economic engines that rivaled palaces and courts. Vast estates stretched beyond the city walls. Workshops hummed with labor. Storehouses overflowed with grain and silver. And at the center of it all stood the sacred precincts where devotion and profit merged seamlessly. What worshippers experienced as ritual, scribes recorded as revenue. Clay tablets list offerings with bureaucratic precision names, dates, quantities revealing a system managed not by passion or chaos, but by careful administration. Faith did not float above the economy. It was embedded within it. Sacred sexuality proved especially lucrative. Travelers arriving in Babylon brought wealth from distant lands, and many were drawn to the temples as part of their journey, believing that pleasing the goddess ensured safe passage, successful trade, or divine favor. Soldiers sought blessing before battle. Merchants sought luck before contracts. Locals sought absolution or fulfillment of obligation. Each visit left behind silver, goods, or livestock, all absorbed into temple treasuries. The women themselves received none of this wealth directly. Their labor enriched the institution, not their lives. Priests defended this arrangement as cosmic necessity. They taught that the goddess's favor sustained the city's prosperity, that the rituals ensured fertile fields, healthy births, and political stability. To disrupt the system, they warned, would invite famine, defeat, or divine wrath. In this way, economic interest disguised itself as religious responsibility. The more wealth the temples accumulated, the more evidence priests claimed of the goddess's approval. Success validated the system, and the system generated success. The reach of this model extended far beyond Babylon. Similar practices appeared wherever goddess worship took root, adapted to local traditions, but preserving the same logic: female bodies as sacred instruments, sexuality as offering, temples as beneficiaries. Babylon became not only a political power, but a template, exporting a fusion of ritual and commerce that endured for centuries. What began as devotion hardened into tradition, and tradition into law. Yet, beneath the prosperity, lay an uncomfortable truth. This system required constant supply. New women had to replace those who aged, those who broke under the strain, those who simply vanished from the records. The temple did not mourn their absence. It recorded it. Names were scratched from tablets, duties reassigned, accounts balanced. The machine continued, indifferent to individual lives, sustained by belief and fear in equal measure. And still, history presents one final complication. a challenge that unsettles everything that seems certain. Because centuries later, scholars would ask whether this entire system had been misunderstood, exaggerated, or misread by outsiders, whether what we call exploitation was something else entirely. And in that debate, the past itself would begin to resist easy judgment, pulling the story toward its darkest and most controversial revelation. Centuries after Babylon's temples fell silent and their ziggurats crumbled into dust, a new struggle began not over ritual, but over memory. Modern historians, reading the same ancient texts, began to disagree fiercely about what had truly happened behind those sacred walls. Some argued that foreign observers, particularly Greek writers, misunderstood Babylonian religion, projecting their own moral judgments onto rituals they did not fully grasp. They suggested that what outsiders labeled prostitution may have been symbolic rites, misunderstood gestures of devotion, or roles far more complex than crude exploitation. In this telling, the women of Ishtar's temple were priestesses, not victims, respected figures performing sacred duties beyond modern comprehension. Yet the clay tablets refused to stay silent. Temple archives list payments too specific to ignore. Legal codes regulate the status of temple women with language unmistakably tied to sexual service. Hymns describe preparation of beds, sanctification of bodies, and acts that leave little room for metaphor. These sources were not written by hostile foreigners, but by Babylonians themselves, administrators, priests, and scribes who documented the system as routine reality. Whatever later scholars wished to soften, the ancient record remained stubbornly material, grounded in transactions, regulations, and profit. The truth that emerges is deeply uncomfortable because it resists simple categories. Sacred prostitution was neither pure myth nor universally applied law. It was a layered system, shifting across centuries, cities, and classes. Some women may have entered temple service willingly, finding relative independence in a society that otherwise confined them. Others were dedicated as children, absorbed into a life they never chose. The same institution could contain privilege and coercion, reverence and abuse, spirituality and commerce, all operating simultaneously without contradiction in the minds of those who upheld it. What remains most haunting is not the debate itself, but what it cannot resolve. The women's voices are missing. No diary records their fear or faith. No tablet preserves their consent or resistance. History speaks through laws, hymns, and accounts written by those who benefited from the system, leaving us to reconstruct human lives from bureaucratic traces. We see structure, not emotion, policy, not pain, and in that absence, the moral weight of the story grows heavier, not lighter. Babylon believed this system was sacred. It believed the goddess demanded it, that prosperity depended on it, that order required it. And because belief was absolute, cruelty became invisible. Across history, this pattern repeats itself. Institutions, cloaked in divine authority, transforming exploitation into duty, obedience into virtue, suffering into sacrifice. Babylon's sacred women were praised as holy, yet lived as property. They were honored in name, yet erased in practice. When the temples finally fell and the rituals faded, the system did not end with a confession or apology. It simply disappeared, leaving behind ruins and arguments. What survives is a lesson carved into history itself, that religion, power, and tradition can combine to sanctify almost anything, even the control of human bodies, even the silencing of human lives. And when future generations look back, they are left not with certainty, but with an unsettling reflection. How easily societies can call something sacred, and how long that word can hide the truth.